attempt to answer all your questions, but must remind you that we are unable to answer anything in relation to confidential exams and assessment materials. I'll now pass you on to Guy Melliwer, Subject Officer, who will take you through this afternoon's event. Welcome to the briefing, Guy.
Thank you, Lewis. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining Lewis and I on this WJEC Summer 2021 Subject Adaptation briefing for GCSE English Language in Wales. My name is Guy Melliwer and I'm the Subject Officer who manages this qualification at WJEC, and you've already been introduced to Lewis Beecham, the Subject Support Officer for the GCSE English Qualifications in Wales. I'll be taking you through a short presentation outlining the adaptation process that took place this summer and providing guidance for you and your learners on how to prepare for the 4 adaptations pertaining to the qualification for entry in summer 2021. The primary purpose in adapting qualifications for summer 2021 is to mitigate lost teaching and learning time in 2020. The aim of any adaptation is to make assessment in 2021 fair for all candidates. Whilst candidates may not address the personal circumstances, while adaptations may not address the personal circumstances affecting individual students, we have strived to achieve the fairest balance for all. WJEC has discussed the rationale and considerations for any adaptations to qualifications with Qualifications Wales and had their approval as our regulator for these plans. Outlined here on this slide is the rationale we use in determining any adaptations made. Obviously, the first one I've already covered. The second one, adaptations should maintain the level of demand to make the qualification shorter, not easier. Maintain a reasonable balance of reliability versus validity. Assessments should therefore still target all grades. Ensure that all assessment objectives are assessed in this qualification. Not remove content or skills required for progression to FE or HE. Some assessments requiring practical or group work need to be modified to take into account appropriate social distancing measures. Moving on. As the regulator in Wales, Qualifications Wales published on the 15th of July 2020 their requirements for adapting general qualifications in 2021. In this document, Qualifications Wales specified the principles with which WJEC must comply, as well as the balance to be achieved when those principles conflict. On this slide and the next slide, you will see the 7 principles that have been covered. I will go through those one by one. Principle 1, WJEC must seek to ensure that learners are not advantaged or disadvantaged relative to their peers in other jurisdictions, namely that being England, when comparing the qualification and its adaptations in Wales to England. Principle 2, WJEC must seek to ensure that all qualifications are a reliable indication of the knowledge, skills and understanding specified in the qualification following any adaptations to assessments. Clearly, it was not possible to remove certain aspects of the AOs that are normally tested in the qualification. Principle 3, WJEC must seek to ensure that qualification content in general is not reduced. However, content can be restructured so it can reasonably be streamlined, such as in relation to optional units. Principle 4, WJEC must seek to ensure that the manageability of assessment is maximised, where this will allow for an increase in teaching time in order to minimise the impact on outcomes. Moving on to Principle 5, WJEC must seek to maintain standards as far as possible within the same qualification in line with previous years. Principle 6, WJEC must seek to maintain standards as far as possible across similar qualifications made available by WJEC, so that could very well be Welsh First Language GCSE, which is broadly similar to GCSE English Language, and by other awarding bodies. Principle 7, WJEC must seek to ensure that flexibility in the delivery of assessments is maximised so as to reduce the impact of disruption, illness or quarantine, including lockdown at a local level. We'll pause there
Thank you, Guy. We haven't had any questions at the minute in relation to the adaptations, or just give it a few seconds, see if anything comes in. It doesn't look like anything's coming in. I think we can continue.
Okay, thank you, Lewis. We cannot ensure that every adaptation will provide maximum benefit for every centre, but we have listened to feedback and taken a logical approach to streamlining the qualification. Moving on to the next slide, you will see an outline of the 4 adaptations pertaining to GCSE English language for entry next summer. Starting with Unit 1 Oracy, the NEA unit worth 20% of the qualification total. Removal of Task 2, the responding and interacting group discussion. Hopefully you will have all realised that on the 1st of September, the stimulus materials for assessment in 2021 were not released. This was a deliberate move, obviously by us, because for next summer, the group discussion is not required for external moderation process. Therefore, the only task that will be required to be assessed for entry in summer 2021 is the individual research presentation. The other adaptation related to Unit 1 Oracy is about the conditions of control for Task 1 individual research presentation. WJC will be more permissive to enable students not able to attend school or college to complete their presentations. A little bit extra clarification on that from me right now. We're aware, obviously, that the face-to-face format for these assessments to take place could certainly be in some form of jeopardy at any point, over the next 7 or 8 months. Therefore, if you do have students who are due to present Task 1 to you, then and are not able to get into school or college, we will allow them to present remotely using formats like Skype or Microsoft Teams, to name but 2 examples. Now, what this means is that all of the rules pertaining to the task preparation, the task setting, the task assessing remain unchanged, exactly as they are outlined in the specification. So what we actually mean by that adaptation is that they can present, after the 1 week's preparation time, they can present to their teachers and tutors over a remote kind of communication medium. They can have that recorded. They can then send in cue cards, notes, hard copy of any kind of PowerPoint presentation they may have used, etc. So the only real difference is that we will allow the presentation to take place remotely rather than face-to-face, but everything else remains the same. Now, I'm sure there will be some questions on that in a moment, but I'll just move on to the next 2 adaptations for the qualification, and they relate to the exam units. Unit 2, the first of 2 written exams worth 40% of the qualification weighting. Learners will have a choice from description writing and exposition writing for Section B of Unit 2 in summer 2021. Narration writing will not be assessed in summer 2021. Now, if you read the adaptations in the GCSE booklet that was placed on the secure website over the summer months, you will have seen that for Unit 2, that the 2 writing types that would feature, that we would release these in September, and we're doing this via the briefings. We will also put this kind of announcement on our subject page on the public WJC website as well. I did have a question last night in another briefing, same kind of briefing as today, from a delegate who just wanted to check why we'd taken narration writing out of next summer's Unit 2 exam. Simple answer, we haven't. We're just letting teachers and therefore their students know which 2 of the 3 writing types will appear next summer, was always meant to appear next summer, and therefore which one is not. Okay, so it's directly linked to guided learning hours, and clearly the fact that narration writing will not feature should hopefully kind of claw back some of that lost teaching time in the same way that it would for the removal of the group discussion with Unit 1 oracy. The fourth adaptation appears for Unit 3 next summer. We have changed the requirement for students to answer both writing tasks in Section B. Learners will now be offered a choice of responding to either the argumentation task or the persuasion task. This will reduce the timing of the examination by 30 minutes. So in a similar kind of format really to Unit 2 Section B, students will have now a choice of writing task. However, rather than doubling the amount of marks or the time for the one writing task, it remains the same mark tariff and timing, so therefore the exam paper will be 30 minutes shorter. I did have a question yesterday just asking would we communicate to teachers and their students which writing formats would be used for Unit 3, i.e. Letter, report, speech, article, etc. The answer is no. We've just given the optionality of writing task in Section B of Unit 3, so we won't be prescribing the actual format in which they need to write for those tasks. And as mentioned earlier with the Qualifications Wales principles, we had to make sure that English language GCSE and Welsh first language GCSE were aligned as best as they could. So if you check the adaptations for Welsh first language GCSE, you will see the commonality between our adaptations and their adaptations. So I will pause there. I think we can now take some questions on those 4 adaptations for entry next summer.
Thanks, Guy. We've had quite a few questions for November, so I'll just publish one now. So a common question has been if, for November 2020, if candidates will have to do both of the Unit 1 oracy tasks.
The answer is yes. The adaptations, WJC was instructed by Qualifications Wales to create adaptations for assessments in summer 2021, so it didn't involve November 2020. The exam units remain unchanged. Okay, so it's both writing tasks. Unit 3 Section B are compulsory. We will not publish which writing types will feature in Unit 2 Section B. And of course, for the oracy, the 2 tasks, the presentation and group discussion, are both required for entry in November. It is important to note that it is not possible to carry forward a Unit 1 oracy mark from the summer, as one doesn't exist. I appreciate that quite a few centres in Wales were able to submit marks and even upload their sample using our new online platform, Surpass. But because the summer series was cancelled, no external moderation took place, and therefore those marks do not stand. So for any entries for November 2020, the qualification remains unchanged. One thing to note is that if you have the recordings for either or both the presentation and group discussion for entry in summer 2020, they are, of course, permissible for November 2020. The stimulus materials are the same for assessment in June and November of the same calendar year as always. And of course, the presentation is based on one of those 5 generic themes outlined in the specifications. So you can use those recordings. You do not have to produce new work with your students for November 2020.
We've had another anonymous question asking if the March deadline for Unit 1 will be pushed back.
The answer to that is no. It is still the 24th of March. It is obviously just the one task required for entry in summer 2021. I was asked yesterday, following the briefing, could the presentation that was completed this calendar year be used next summer. So I suppose that would apply to year 10 students if they did the presentation at some point in year 10. Could that then be used in year 11? It could. But going back to that question, WJC has not been instructed to change any of its NEA deadlines as such for next summer. I mean, should a centre encounter any difficulties in getting, the IRPs completed for its cohort, and as normal, it's important to get in touch with GCSE English, whereby we can, listen to your concerns and possibly, authorise an extension if one is required, and so on. But as it stands right now, 24th of March deadline remains.
Thanks, Guy. I've just published another question. Can presentations already recorded by students during lockdown whilst at home and not via Teams be submitted?
I need to know a little bit more context behind that, but what I will say, my immediate answer would be no. Now, the adaptations were published in the last week of the summer term, and as mentioned, throughout June and July, WJC organised focus groups with teachers and examiners, and then sent a survey to all teachers in Wales about proposed adaptations, more of which I'll mention in the next few slides. And when those proposals were confirmed and kind of announced in that final week of last term, those 4 adaptations where we are going forward. So if a presentation was completed prior to all of that, the first thing WJC would want to know is whether the NEA conditions, the high level of control, all of those aspects outlined in the specification were followed. So, in terms of the task setting, the preparation period of 1 week, and then delivering the task. The fact that what troubles me here is that it says that the student made the recording, and it looks like the teacher or tutor was not involved in that at all. So that would be a no from me at this point. Whoever that teacher perhaps who posed that question, may wish to kind of contact myself, email or phone call to discuss that further, but that isn't the advice we would give out to teachers. I think if we just rewind about 5-7 minutes, I mentioned there with the second adaptation for oracy that WJC will accept presentations being delivered remotely, but with the proviso that the teacher or tutor is present, able to record it, and then later assess it. There is no level of control if the student just records the presentation and sends that in.
Thanks, Guy. We've got time for one more question. You've touched briefly on this before. This is from Lorna. Can we conduct the majority of students' Unit 1 oracy presentations via an online format? This would aid in schools' physical arrangements, or is it only students who physically can't come into school due to medical reasons and or lockdown or isolation situation?
I think we'd like to be flexible on that question. And, if for individual schools, colleges, it works that the presentation can be delivered remotely, all of the guidance and level of control is followed, etc., for the students involved, then I can't really see any issue with that, in terms of compliance. So my answer would be we'd like to be flexible. We are aware that individual centres will have very, very different situations and issues kind of facing them over the next 8, 9, 10 months, leading up to the kind of exam series next summer. So yes, I think we would allow that. Again, what I would suggest is that Lorna, who's posed that question, perhaps just get in touch with myself and Lewis at WJC, probably best as an email in the first instance, just so we can share that with colleagues, just to check that you know, that would be accepted before you obviously you know, continue down that path. Right, we will have some time for more questions during the presentation and also at the end as well, but thank you for those that have been shared so far. So let's have a look. We're on to summary of stakeholders survey. WJC was very grateful to teachers across Wales who engaged with subject officers through focus group meetings in early June to shape our thinking to ensure that it reflected the realities faced by teachers and learners. We are very grateful to everyone who gave their time to collaborate with us on this work, and to the many teachers who shared their views via the July survey. Now on this slide, you know, you'll be able to see a little breakdown of general kind of feedback to the two proposed adaptations that were mentioned initially, that being the removal of the group discussion and the optionality of writing task in section B of Unit 3. But as you make your way through this slide, you'll see that, you know, via the survey results that came in, a number of centres were concerned about the impact of two Oracy NEA tasks would have on a very limited you know, time frame, curriculum time frame in lessons, okay, to get those two completed, and also concerns some FE centres who would not have any face-to-face contact with their students over the next academic year, that really a request for the presentation to be delivered remotely. There's also reference to a number of surveys that kind of pointed in the direction of wanting to know what the writing types would be in section B of Unit 2. So WJC listened to its stakeholders and added 2 additional adaptations to the subject for entry next summer. The next slide also has a little bit of detail about the rationale behind each of those adaptations. Okay, so clearly AO1 Oracy, the assessment objective there could be assessed fully through the presentation, even though the group discussion would be removed, it wouldn't impact negatively on that AO. Clearly for AO3, the writing, the qualification has 3 extended writing tasks, 1 in Unit 2, 2 in Unit 3. So to reduce that by 1, i.e. Unit 3, wouldn't impact negatively on AO3 at all. And the one thing you will be probably more than aware of is that for AO2 reading, we have not removed any assessment within that. Otherwise, that would have impacted negatively on the AO for reading. I think the next slide is an opportunity. Oh, it's not an opportunity for more questions, sorry. We're very much aware of the pressures facing teachers, learners and the wider education teams across the country in the wake of the COVID-19 lockdown. Working with Qualifications Wales, WJC has aimed to mitigate the disruption to teaching and learning due to school and college closures, whilst adhering to the regulatory principles 2 and 3 in considering adaptations for the 2021 summer series. So you'll see on this slide lots of different aspects of the assessment that had to be considered when creating those adaptations. I think it's the next slide that there may be another pause for questions.
Thanks, Gary. We've had some further questions. So I'm just going to publish the first one, and this is sent to us anonymously. It says, November research has been made very difficult and lacks parity with the summer exam, and this poses a risk to learner progression. Why haven't the change been put in place in time for November 2020?
Well, the simple answer there is that the exam regulator for Wales, Qualifications Wales, didn't require WJC to make any adaptations to the November 2020 series. Now, from the top of my head, I believe GCSE English Language, GCSE First Language Welsh, and GCSE Mathematics take place in the November series. None of those qualifications have any adaptations to them. So WJC, as an awarding organisation, is clearly regulated by Qualifications Wales. They instruct us as to what to do with qualifications, particularly in this instance with reference to adaptations. I mean, what I can say is that the November series is a very small series. For the last 2 years, we've had about 3,500 candidates entered, where about 600 to 700 are first-time entrants. So I would have thought, whether there are adaptations or not to the November 2020 series, that the vast majority of centres, probably more likely schools and FE centres, would not be using the November 2020 as a first-time entry point, what with the lockdown from mid-March straight through to September. So I know that perhaps doesn't provide the most definitive answer, but other than the fact that WJC was not instructed by Qualifications Wales to create any adaptations to November 20, then there's nothing really I can add there. I mean, clearly, whoever's sent in that question, I'm guessing, has some students who enter in the November series as first-time entrants. So I can only imagine if they're fully prepared, then they will sit that qualification regardless and will have both oracy tasks completed already or shortly. But if they're not fully prepared, if the lockdown has had an impact on that general progress of being prepared for first time entry in November, then they will move to the summer 2021 series instead.
Thanks for that. The next one I've just posted now, someone's looking for clarity if Unit 3 marks for Section B will be out of 40 and worth 20% of the overall qualification. Now,
correct me if I'm wrong, I think the only reason to know the answer to that would be if you're an examiner. I think if you're a teacher or tutor or even a student, then there's no need to kind of be too concerned about marks and waiting for tasks. I mean, as mentioned already this afternoon, the writing task is still going to be out of 20 marks, and half an hour in time will be kind of allotted to it, meaning that the paper will be an hour and a half as opposed to 2 hours. I mean, WJC will obviously have to adjust the weightings, etc., so that we have 100% weighting across the qualification. But that's certainly not something for teachers or students to be concerned about at this time. This obviously applies to the group discussion being removed from Unit 1 oracy. The presentation is still marked out of 40 with the split 2020, continues as normal. And as I say, later down the line, when it comes to awarding, etc., WJC and its research team will have to establish a way of making sure that we've got 100% weighting across all 3 units.
Thanks, Guy. The next one, I'm not sure if either of us will have the answer to this, but in regards to carry forward, will learners resitting in 2021/2022 be able to take marks from the previous academic year in light of this year's changes, or is it too premature to ask?
It's not too premature to ask. If I've got my head around that question, as mentioned near the start, it's not possible to carry forward Unit 1 oracy from summer 2020 because a mark doesn't exist. Every other exam series at this point in time, before summer 20 and following summer 20, so that'll be this November and next summer, where a Unit 1 oracy mark is submitted and undergoes the external moderation by WJC, then a carry forward will be possible following that. Okay, let me just have another look through that question. I think I've answered it. So just summer 20, the carry forward is not possible, but every other exam series, it will be possible.
Great, thank you. I've got time for one more question, and
Okay.
simply is ORC still worth 20%?
It is, yes, that hasn't changed. It's obviously the removal of one of the tasks would look like 10% has been taken away, but as I mentioned, you know, it doesn't mean that the AO2 reading and AO3 writing will then increase by 5% each. The qualification has to be maintained, you know, following its accreditation back in 2015. And until the qualification is archived and replaced, so the weightings won't change. And just a couple of more slides to conclude the briefing. One of Qualification Wales's principles and a key concern for WJC as a leading exam provider in both Wales and England is ensuring that learners in Wales are not advantaged or disadvantaged when compared to their peers in other jurisdictions. The Secretary of State in England is not minded to specify changes to DFE content for most subjects which form the foundation for GCSE, AS and A-level qualifications, but he has asked Ofqual, the regulator in England, to explore use of content sampling in question papers and increasing the use of optional questions for some qualifications only. Here you can see the arrangements as of now for candidates in Wales and England sitting the same qualification in 2021. So on the left hand side you've got the 4 adaptations for GCSE English language in Wales that we've gone through, and on the right there are 3 adaptations to the spoken language endorsement, which is unweighted for the qualification in England. So the interesting thing to note is that there are no adaptations on the 2 exam components, which are 100% weighted. And moving on to the penultimate slide, WJC has planned for adaptations, the 2021 summer assessments that reflect the lost teaching and learning time resulting from the coronavirus lockdown that extended from March to September of this year. We've also planned for different scenarios that may come to pass in the next 12 months. And finally, I'd like to thank you for your time in watching this presentation today. If you have any questions regarding this or any other aspect of the qualification, please email our GCSE English inbox, which is displayed on the slide. You can also contact us by telephone. Our contact numbers are on the subject page of the public WJC website. We hope that by working together, we can make the learning and assessment experience in 2021 a manageable and productive one for our learners in Wales. Thank you.
Thanks, Scott. We've had one further question asking if there will still be a maximum file size restriction, and that's given the files recorded via Teams or any other online platform may be larger.
It's a good question. It's one I don't know the answer to without consulting with our e-submissions team. So we have a range of subjects that are submitted via online platforms like Surpass at WJC, and I'm sure this question will be relevant to a number of subjects. And as soon as we get clarification on file sizes and the maximum size of them, you know, we will be able to communicate that with centre exams officers for centres in Wales.